Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Antonietta Quigg. Thank you for coming to my talk. I'll be speaking to you on marine snow formation and fluxes as a result of crude oil spills. The work presented today is a summary of findings from the Deepwater Horizon oil spill study. This is the work of the ADDOMEx consortium, which was funded by the Gomeroi Research Initiative. It is also the work of many others in many other consortium. The Deepwater Horizon oil spill, as you know, began on April 20, 2010, more than a decade ago. 11 people were killed in the largest spill in US history. Approximately 4.9 million barrels of oil were discharged, and 1.84 million gallons of oil dispersant applied in an effort to clean up the spill. In situ burning and other methods were also used to try and clean up the spill. While most folks know about the charismatic megafauna which were impacted, such as this turtle, very few know about the microbial community and the work they did in order to clean up the spill. And that will be the focus of today's talk. What we did was we focused our effort on trying to understand how the introduction of oil to the ocean triggers the formation of marine oil snow, also known as moss. We know that this is able to emulsify the oil and ultimately alter the fate and transport of the oil, either by degradation, dispersion, sedimentation, or a combination of these factors. Collectively, these processes are referred to as MOSFER, and MOSFER as a process is thought to have accounted for up to 31% of the oil returned to the sea floor. Why do we care about MOSFER, and in particular, marine snow? Marine snow is released by bacteria, phytoplankton, and zooplankton. It is a combination of exopolymers made up of proteins, lipids, and carbohydrates. In natural food web processes, this is a mechanism for transferring organic matter to the depths of the ocean, and in a typical year, between 4 and 12 gigatons of carbon are sedimented. This biological carbon pump is important for maintaining the carbon balance of the natural ocean, that is, an ocean without oil spills. When we do have an oil spill, however, we know that phytoplankton and other kinds of microbes will produce even more marine snow in a kind of a stress response. This leads to the bioaccumulation of hydrocarbons into pelagic food webs, and it also leads to an increase in exposure of benthic organisms to oil and dispersant as it makes its way to the sea floor. What are the important drivers of marine oil snow formation and or of MOSFER? During a workshop in 2012, the main drivers were found to be riverine influences, marine biota, and those two factors combining with the oil and dispersants. As a result of a NOAA report which was published in 2012, we were also informed that there is several kinds of ways in which marine oil snow can form. In fact, there are three main mechanisms. The one on the bottom left-hand corner is the classic mechanism in which phytoplankton and bacteria transport oil to deep sea plumes. However, there are other mechanisms that can be involved, specifically when dispersant is applied and or when burnt oil products are involved in the formation of aggregates. There are also oil mineral aggregates which form by similar processes, but usually rather than having microbial community members acting as a ballast, we instead have mineral particles which come in from riverine inputs or, in the case of the Deepwater Horizon spill, as a result of drill mud being applied to try and cap the spill entering the ocean. The third kind of OMA occurs in places like the Gulf of Mexico, where you have a shallow coastal shelf and surf mixing introduces a lot of mineral and particulate matter into the water column. So as a result of the work during the GOMRI program, we learned for the first time, I would say, that moss formation follows two main pathways. On the right-hand side, we see that in the presence of biological surfactants, that is the marine snow, we get oil coated in these materials and ultimately sticking and together, forming an aggregate and sinking. When dispersant is applied, we see that the process is modified, and instead of the biological surfactants coating the oil, the dispersant coats the oil. And in fact, the dispersant results in the formation of many more oil droplets and smaller oil droplets. And this in turn changes the pathways for both aggregation and sinking of the MOSFET material. This diagram here, which was published by Uropasso in 2017, is probably one of the most elegant examples of the differences between biological surfactants and chemical dispersants in how they interact with the oil and with the materials in the organic materials. What you find is that the organic materials here in the green will stick to the oil. The exopolymers they release, shown here in blue, will also stick to the oil, and collectively you will form aggregates. In this scenario, which is shown on the left-hand side, you get large aggregates forming that are filled with organic material in terms of algal or microbial biomass, but not very much oil. On the left-hand side, we see what happens when dispersant's applied. Lots of oil droplets, very small, coated in dispersant, but generally much less organic material, either phytoplankton or bacteria, present, and generally less exopolymers released. The aggregates turn out to be larger, filled with much more oil and dispersant, so that ultimately you get more oil accumulated in the sediments as the material eventually sinks. In some ways, this helps us to understand why MOSFET accounts for between 4 and 31% of the oil returning to sediments, because there are several different processes occurring all at the same time in areas where there is and is not chemical dispersant present. The other reason that we see a range in the amount of oil returning to the sediments is because the biological communities producing these exopolymers are quite unique, and the starting communities really are the ones that we have found are critical in determining the fate of the oil or the oil plus dispersant degradation. We know that the starting communities found in the surface ocean are very distinct from those found in the deep sea, and ultimately there will be a difference in the cascade of reactions that occurs as these bacterial communities, phytoplankton communities, break down the oil. On the right-hand side, you can see a network analysis, and the take-home from that is that there is a very big difference in the diversity of the communities, as well as the interactions between the community members. The grey is from a control experiment, the orange is from an experiment with oil, and the green is oil plus dispersant. And the oil plus dispersant has both the least amount of diversity and the least number of interactions taking place compared to the control and the oil only. And we see that concurrently there are differences in the flux of marine oil snow formation, but also in the flux and fate of the oil and the dispersant materials. This is a scenario that we saw with the Deepwater Horizon, where you have a deep water blowout. You see oil and dispersant in the surface interacting with microbes and microbial communities, and you also see a subsurface plume. What we know now is that moss formation occurred not only in the surface after the deepwater horizon, but also in the subsurface plume. And in both cases, these moss formation events resulted in mossfer and therefore the sedimentation of oil back to the deep sea. In a very different scenario, such as a spill in the coastal ocean or in an embayment, we postulate that you will see mossfer events taking place, and given that it's less likely that dispersants will be applied because we're so close to the shoreline, we are not going to see dispersant-driven mossfer events. But we may instead see OMA formation because there'll be more likely inputs for riverine in sources as well as shorelines, which contribute clays, minerals, and other organic matter that's going to interact with the oil and lead to its sedimentation. So we're going to see a gradient from OMA sinking close to shore to mossfer sinking as you go further offshore. And going forward, where will we likely see either a mossfer event happening again, or perhaps just marine oil snow forming? Based on information that we've gleaned in the last decade, we can start to develop complex models, but we can also, as shown in this diagram, develop very simple conceptual diagrams to start making predictions. But even the very simple conceptual diagrams, as shown here on the right, are based in very complex analysis and studies done. And in this study here, what was done was connecting algal productivity, which we know impacts ocean color density, and sediment load in order to make predictions about where mossfer may occur. And the value of this really comes in connecting it to satellite imaging, because we can use satellites to predict algal productivity. Therefore, we may be able to use this combination of information to predict when and where there will be a large mossfer event, and therefore where and when the oil may be deposited. Other critical next steps involve using mossfer to as part of planning, response, and damage assessment. And we'd also like to see the use of moss in evaluating the oil spill impacts, especially in regards to humans, human health, and socioeconomics. And towards those next steps, some of the progress which has been made comes from Rouse et al., in which they developed a flow diagram for first responders and for those planning the best strategies during an oil spill event. And it all starts here at the start, as you can see where it says start, with simple yes and no questions. We can predict whether there's going to be a mossfer event, and therefore how to best respond to an oil spill. And as you can see in this diagram here, we've also made a lot of progress in not just considering what's going on in the ocean in terms of biological systems and the ocean environment, but we've also made progress in terms of connecting these marine oil snow mossfer events in the overall understanding of oil spill releases and how human health and socioeconomics may be impacted. And specifically, if you look at the work of Solo, Gabriella, and colleagues, there is just an amazing array of connections and directions in which an oil spill release impacts the ocean environment, as well as biological systems, ecosystem services, economics, human health, etc., etc. And with the work of the Gomerai initiative, we've been able to really start to make progress in understanding how all of these pieces fit together and how they're all interconnected. And with that, I would like to say thank you, especially to Dr. Chuck Wilson and the entire GOMRI team and board members for all their support over the years in the work that we've done, as well as a thank you to the International Oil Spill organisers for including me in their lineup this year. Many thanks.